Hello, Sanya. This is my feedback to your mock listening exam. Uh, I looked at your notes. They're quite detailed, they're good notes, and your final notes are different than the first notes, but I would say to make it more obviously different for whoever is going to grade your exam, to make it really, really obvious that they're different, I would suggest your first notes do not need to be so organized as they are, because you've already kind of organized your ideas in your first notes. Just make them more messy, not with full sentences, with fragments, with abbreviations, with all kinds of things that are typical of first notes. So imagine you're in a lecture room and there is a speaker and they're talking fast. You cannot write full sentences because you cannot cope with the speed at which they're speaking, right? So use abbreviations, use symbols, whatever you need to do. You do not have to, it could be very messy, no problem with that. Then after you've discussed it with your peers, you could then organize your notes, and you've done well with the supporting ideas in your final notes. That's where you could also mention evidence and all that, and you can type them up, so that difference will be very clear to the examiner, because we are only at this point, when we look at the notes, we're only grading how different your final notes are from the first notes. We're not grading the quality of the notes. Okay, so make sure they look even more different than the ones you've submitted here. And then another thing, yeah, at the end of that document with the two notes, you can include, or you should include, an explanation about how you changed the notes from your first to the final notes. What did you do? What did you add? What did you delete? How did you organize them? How did you make them? How did you get at the final notes? This is, if you go to the guidelines, you'll see that that's part of what you need to do. Okay, so for the exam, don't forget that explanation. It doesn't have to be very long, a few sentences, but you do need to include it. Okay, so now let's look at your paragraphs. It's a good paragraph, the summary, but remember we keep saying you should not include examples, and here you've used quite a few examples, right? We don't do that. This is for the evidence paragraphs. At this point, you only focus on the supporting ideas. That's your only focus. So, first sentence, include the title of the video, the speaker you've included, good reporting verb, and then your main idea is stated quite well. Okay, I'll accept that. But then you start again with an example, you see? Just focus on what idea he is proving. And the idea is that original thinkers also tend to procrastinate, but what looks like procrastination is actually a natural part of the creative process. You can say something like that. Now, here when you say the speaker highlights that procrastinators are less creative, that seems to completely contradict the idea of the video. He's saying that procrastinators are not necessarily original thinkers or procrastinators are not necessarily less creative. In fact, that helps with their creativity, right? So here it's a bit confusing. And then you're saying due to time management. And he argues that procrastination leads to different ideas. So what does that mean? Are they creative or are they not? And what does different ideas mean here? So you have to be very clear. This is quite confusing, this sentence here. He states that original thinkers, or great original minds like Leonardo and Martin Luther King, waste. He does not say that. I mean, it doesn't mean that he gave the Martin Luther example as he said that in the last minute he knew his speech, but in the last minute he added those famous words. So that was an example of how a great idea, which became an original idea, and he became famous for that speech, was added at the last minute. But that doesn't mean that he was wasting his time, right? So again, here you've slightly misunderstood. Uh, Actually, there's quite a lot of misunderstanding in this paragraph. You've written it well, but the ideas, you have to be very careful how you understand the ideas, because there's quite a lot of misunderstanding here. You've done a lot of good things. So reporting verbs, a lot of good cohesive devices. The structure is very good, but you really need to be clear on what these ideas are, because these are the things that you will make you write the summary. And after that, the evidence paragraph will also come out of that. So be very clear on what the ideas are. He's certainly not saying that they waste their time. And he's certainly not saying that procrastination makes you less creative, right? He highlights that doubt has two types. Okay, doubt has two types, like self and idea. I'm not very sure what this means. Like self and idea. You mean self-doubt and idea doubt, maybe? Or I'm not sure. It just doesn't sound very good, this kind of phrasing. I sort of understand what you're trying to say, but you need to make that clear. He uses the example, again we stay away from examples. Rewrote the first version of the character, became, okay. So this whole thing here, we do not include that in the summary. Instead, we explain the idea itself. But to be honest, I'm not very sure what this means. The doubt has two types, self and idea. I think you can just stay with the more general supporting idea that original thinkers also experience doubts and fears. But what sets them apart from ordinary people is what they do with those doubts and with those fears. They accept them and they make them a natural part of the creative process, and then actually that leads them to create even better ideas. So they experience doubt just as we do, but they use doubt for productive purposes, doubts and fears. I think that was the idea that he was talking about. And so you could explain, you could expand on that supporting idea instead of using this example, okay? Moreover, the speaker provides the data that originals also have bad ideas. They, like everybody else, they have bad ideas. They don't only have good ideas. Some of their ideas are not necessarily good. But among the lots of bad ideas, there are a few really good ones. That's what he's talking about, right? And again, here we don't include these examples in the summary. The idea shows that failures, yeah, you see, now you've said it. That's the supporting idea. Original thinkers use failure to work even harder on their ideas. They use failure productively. So you should first, be very clear on your supporting ideas. Second, do not include examples. And obviously you have 200 words, so you will expand on these supporting ideas. And that's your summary. The identification, there's no problem with it. You've basically explained everything. The only thing I would say here, you're starting with a supporting idea. The speaker provides an idea about fear and doubts among originals. To prove this idea, he states that doubt has two types. Now here I'm not very sure when he said that and if that's really the supporting idea. So you're starting with a very kind of vague supporting idea. And then whatever else you're going to say, you're kind of forcing yourself to relate it to a vague supporting idea. I think the supporting idea was simply that they use their doubts and their fears for creative purposes to make their creative process even better. So they also experience fear, but they use it more productively than ordinary people. That's the supporting idea. And then you could use this. Now, but as a paragraph, you've done okay here, except you need to stick with the word limit. So try to fit within within 100 words. But again, you should be absolutely clear that you know what the supporting idea is. This is crucial for the summary and for these paragraphs as well. Okay, but as a format, as a way of writing it, you've done well. You've started with the idea and you've enumerated the evidence. That's exactly what you need to do in the exam. Now let's look at this paragraph. Evidence is insufficient. Now I noticed that the way you've done it, and I think you wrote 240 something words, and that's obviously way too many words. So what you need to do, because there's so many pieces of evidence and it's very hard to talk about all of them, so you start with this is insufficient, then later on you say that the other piece is sufficient somewhere here. Where did you say that? Somewhere around here you said, oh yeah, this is sufficient. Then again you talk about sufficiency somewhere else. So it became a little bit difficult to read this paragraph because you're going from sufficient to representative, then back to sufficient, because you're talking about the ideas, the different pieces of evidence separately. I think the best way to do that, just talk about all the evidence together. Is it sufficient? So you don't end up going zigzagging here. Okay. Now, what you've done with this paragraph is actually, even though it's a little disorganized, the way you've actually written about the three categories is quite good. So here, lack of credible sources. That's exactly the kind of thing you need to talk about when you discuss sufficiency. The speaker does not highlight all of this. That's a very good way of phrasing it. So use that way of explaining why it's not sufficient. Okay. Secondly, the piece of evidence about internet browser choice looks like the speaker's prediction due to lack of source citation. However, these pieces of evidence are relevant to the supporting idea because it refers to the doubt. Okay, fine, why not? That's a good explanation. I like the way you have specifically targeted part of the argument. So that's exactly what you should do for the exam. So there's a lot of good things you've done in this paragraph. But the way you've organized it, you've made it very difficult for yourself by zigzagging. So you do not have to explain if you have 3 or 4 pieces of evidence. You don't have to comment on each single one of them. It's impossible to do it in 200 words. So you could do it together. Okay. It refers to the doubt. Very nice. That's exactly what you should do. Target a specific part of the argument. Is partially now here. Well, okay, colorful slides, but so what? We're not talking about the design of his slides. We're talking about the quality of his argument, right? But I like this part here. So forget about how well the slides are made or what the design is. What we're interested in, like you're saying here, they do not show the opposite view. Very good. So is it really a typical example, what he's showing, the pieces of evidence he's presenting? Does that represent the creative process? Is that a typical example of it? Right? Provides another example. Yeah, here again, see, this is just, you probably don't even need that, just because you should have already talked about sufficiency once and for all. Okay, and then you say partially presented demonstrates only one side of his essay. That's exactly the kind of wording you should do in the exam. So you've done a lot of good things here, and you understand the three components: representativeness, relevance, and sufficiency. Just make it very organized and start very clearly with a clearly understood supporting idea, and you should be in good shape. So good luck to you, Sanya. This is my last screencast. I wish you all the very best on the exam and in the future. I know you're a smart student, so I know you will do well. Good luck.